Everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, delighted to be having a second conversation with author, educator Frank Baker. May I call you Frank? Is that okay?
Sure. Thank you so much.
Of course, absolutely. Thank you for joining. And on this episode, we're talking about a current book of yours and talking about the political world and issues and history and things of that nature. So glad to be featuring you and talking more about this story.
Thank you very much. Honored to be with you.
Glad to be with you as well. Would you like to tell us anything about the origin of the project?
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it. I'd like to start with the title, if I may.
Of
Uh,
course.
I was speaking with students recently, and I put the word risk up on the board. And I said, what does it mean to take a risk? And then I put the word resilience up there, and I said, what does the word resilience mean? And lastly, I put up the word redemption. And of course, I had to define some of these words for these students. And I said, now let's think about how those words might apply to someone who was caught up in Hitler's final solution, the Holocaust. What did it mean? Why did I choose those three words as the title of my book? And the origin is goes back to the year 2000 when the late Felix Goldberg of blessed memory spoke about his harrowing Holocaust experience at our synagogue here in Columbia, South Carolina. And I'm in the audience, and I've heard Holocaust stories, but they were written or they were filmed. And now he's speaking to an audience of two or 300. And I'm literally shaken to my core by hearing him testify about what he went through. And the occasion was Yom HaShoah, the annual day of remembrance that occurs in spring. And as this ceremony ended and he stepped off the stage, he walked up to me. He knew I was an educator, and he handed me that speech. And he said, in the beautiful Polish accent, I'll never forget it, Frankie, Frankie, do something with this. And little did I know at the time how impactful that would be. I eventually created a website for teachers about the Holocaust, storiesofsurvival.org. And eventually, I asked the family if I could write a book about their parents. And a university professor here in South Carolina saw the website and said, Frank, this would make a fabulous graphic novel. And I was put in touch with an editor and an illustrator. And 3 years ago, We Survived the Holocaust graphic novel was published.
Mhm.
And then
Mhm.
recently, while speaking to students in the upstate of South Carolina, the librarian came to me and said, Frank, have you ever thought of creating a narrative version of this story? She said, I'm trying to wean my sixth grade boys away from just reading graphic novels. And she showed me two paperbacks that were Holocaust related nonfiction books. And the light bulb went off. In fact, I had already started writing a narrative version, so I had a head start there. And Our book was just recently published in mid-October. And I'm so very pleased to now offer a different version of this story and to maybe invite more young readers into the world of the Goldbergs. For the 6 years that the two of them were uh, slave laborers.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and I know from talking with you before that this has been a meticulous process, that you've been in touch with the family, and obviously they've entrusted this to you. Anything that you'd like to say about that process as it relates to bringing that narrative version to light?
Well, obviously, if you're going to write a book about the Holocaust, you got to do your research, and you've
Mm-hmm.
got to get it right. So when we created the website, I wanted it to be in three parts: before the war, during the war, and after the war. And I began to research everything I already knew about the Goldbergs. I interviewed their children. They brought me a box of materials that had survived the war for me to go through. Uh, and that formed the basis of both the graphic novel and the new book. So the graphic novel is a more complete story. And I say that because it includes the context of what was happening in Europe uh, prior to World War II. What was the atmosphere like?
Mhm.
What was happening with the rise of Adolf Hitler in Germany, and what were the laws and rules and regulations that were quickly passed to restrict the movement of Jews? And so the graphic novel includes that context as well as the story of the Goldbergs. The new book is just the Goldberg story, and that makes it a short book that could be read in an hour.
Mhm. Mhm. Those are such wonderful texts to have. Agreeing with that librarian that you mentioned, uh, I remember reading comics and graphic novels, and then getting gradually more into the world of prose, and have never abandoned comics and graphic novels, but appreciating text across the many forms that you can find it.
I'm very fortunate that that librarian suggested it to me because you know she's at the front line. She's with students every day. She sees their reading habits, and she tries to influence what they read. You and I both know that the graphic novel is most probably the most popular medium or genre, if I will, in school libraries today. I am recalling when I previously worked in Orlando, Florida for the public school system back in the late 80s and early 90s. The librarians there told me, Frank, they often get checked out and sometimes they don't even return. And
Mhm.
I was surprised, but that just tells you what has happened to graphic novels, and I have gravitated to many graphic novels that are nonfiction. I'm so happy to see um, those works be converted. The Diary of Anne Frank, for example, I'm pretty sure your audience knows, is already out at I think two or three different versions.
Mhm. Yeah, I've seen some really beautiful adaptations of that particular book, and amazing work that's being published. Now, your book also features particular images in kind of a chapter book style. So I'm curious about how you went about the process of selecting those images and adding them for the story.
You know, as I think back on Bluma and Felix's stories, as I was writing, I was picturing in my own head what this might look like. And I think readers do that naturally. Most readers
Mhm.
do that. They create a picture in their head. So there were some scenes in in their story that to me were just so natural. Felix Goldberg is on a cattle car going to he doesn't know where. He's packed in it, uh, and he says to himself, there's no way I'm going to stay on this train. And he opens the door and jumps. He says, I want to survive. Um,
Mhm.
Bluma testified that her sister, who she went through the war with, her older sister, they were together the entire time. Her sister got typhus, and she knew she had to do something. So she left the barracks late at one night, trying to avoid the ever constant searchlights, as I wrote, and the guards, and she made her way into a kitchen where she found an apple and she put it in her pocket and she stealthily made her way back to the barracks where she gave it to her sister who survived. Uh, those kinds of stories uh, just it begged an image. There's another story that Bluma told, and the family repeated. Bluma and her sister worked as slave laborers in a munitions factory, making bullets and it was grueling work with working 12 and 14 hours a day. How can you imagine? And
Mm.
one day she happened to nod off, and the supervisor, which she said everyone was afraid of, came by and slapped her on her face, and she immediately woke up. And she said, I never fell asleep again. Those kinds of stories, I think, begged us to include one or more images, um, I think, which helped the reader in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And just tapping into the reading side of it, that process of visualizing, it's so important, and to give students, to give readers a way of getting into the book that way is a wonderful step to include.
Jason, I'm reminded as I was writing this graphic novel, I said to myself, gosh, and I'm writing scenes and I'm writing dialogue. I'm going,
Mhm,
wow, this must be exactly what screenwriters do. They take an
mhm,
existing work and they change it, convert it, so that it's readable by the director, the cinematographer, the costume designer, all of those people. And so that just helped me move on. Uh, to write scenes and dialogue. I've never done that before. And it was very satisfying for me to transmit all of that to our illustrator of the graphic novel, who then sent it back to me, and then I shared it with the Goldberg family, and they said, "Wow, this is this is my parents' story come to life on the page."
mhm. Absolutely, absolutely. Well, speaking of those points of relevance and the way that the page comes to life, I am curious, speaking about sort of the teaching side of this and the life that we all live, looking back through history, what trends, what issues are you continuing to see that are part of this story that form a core of the book?
Well, for me, it was quite obvious early on that many of our young people don't get enough background in school about the Holocaust.
Hmm.
In fact,
Hmm.
there's several surveys out there which are rather shocking about what students don't know. And I began asking history, social studies teachers that I know here in South Carolina, why are our students lacking this essential knowledge? And they said, Frank, we don't have the time. And a colleague of mine said, well, Frank, it's not really time, it's priority. They just haven't made it a priority. So that's really important to me. And I am hearing from educators who have been using the graphic novel. And Frank, we've been using the Diary of Anne Frank. We've been using Elie Wiesel's Night, but now we have your book, and your book is a very personal, and it's also a South Carolina story. And you can't read either of these books without coming away thinking, what was the propaganda that was used at that time in history that convinced people to turn against the Jews?
Hmm.
What form did anti-Semitism take then, and what form of anti-Semitism is taking place today? And when I do speak to students, I usually start with a series of questions. How many of you all know who Adolf Hitler was? How many of you know how many Jews were killed during the Holocaust? How many of you all know who collaborated with the Nazis? How many of you all know what propaganda is? How many of you all know what anti-Semitism is? And it's those last two or three questions, they don't have a clue. And it's
Yeah.
at that point I usually hold up my book and I said, the answers are right here. In fact, I had one student recently say, Mr. Baker, why didn't the Jews fight back? And I said, they did. You just hadn't learned about it. And I turned to his librarian and I said, there's some wonderful books out appropriate for the age group about resistance. So there are so many opportunities here. There is an illustration in the graphic novel. Bluma and her family are seen running from their home, just burned by the Nazis. And when I first saw that illustration 3 years ago now, I said, oh my God, this is Ukraine. This is
Mm-hmm.
exactly what's happening today in history. People running for their lives who don't know where they're going, where they will sleep tonight, whether they will see the sun rise the next day, and they don't know where their next meal's coming from. And we might say the same thing about residents of Gaza. So it's really important for me to help those students make those connections between the past and the present because, as you and I well know, there is rhetoric and there are actions happening today in 2025 that resemble what happened in Nazi Germany in the 1940s. And we cannot turn away, we cannot ignore it. Um, Now is not the time to be silenced.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you were talking about the busy teacher life, the social studies teachers that felt that the Holocaust didn't have space or time in the curriculum. And I just want to also say it would be wonderful for stakeholders, the people that write standards, the people that create the materials that go with those standards, to really emphasize that and to make it a priority, to send teachers the message that this is also something that is well worth the time.
I'll tell you, there's another element to this entire story, and that's media literacy. I, I,
Hmm.
I,
Hmm.
I can't help but, when I'm in front of students, talk about the fact that today they get news and information from sources that social media sources that may not be reliable, that they may not know who is telling them this, and they may be sharing news and information that may not be reliable. We all know that with algorithms and deep fakes uh, proliferating all over the internet, uh, you can't tell what's real and what's not real anymore. And so I think media literacy skills, questioning skills, are more important than ever. And in the Jewish community, we are concerned about anti-Semitism, and we're concerned about Holocaust denial and distortion, which continues to make its ugly head, you know, visible all over the
Hmm.
internet. And so we parents and educators, we have our work cut out for us. You know, we can't rest on our laurels.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that leads me to the next question, which is, what are those questions that you hope that readers are asking and that they continue to think about as they encounter the story of the Goldbergs?
You know, so many questions. How did this happen? What was the environment, or what was the atmosphere in Germany in the 1940s that allowed this to happen? How could cultured people turn against the Jewish people only because they were Jews? Uh, we are recording this right before the anniversary of Crystal Knot being the night of the broken glass, when hundreds of Jewish businesses and synagogues were destroyed. And it was a wake up call to Jews. You need to get out if you can. And many tried, and many could not. I think this book and this time period is perfect for students to explore what was happening. You know, we have newspaper accounts of everything that was happening during the 1940s, during the war, during the Holocaust. Students have a multitude of excellent resources to which they could find. On my part, I knew that both Bluma and Felix Goldberg had been interviewed for more than an hour by South Carolina Public Television. And then subsequently, they were interviewed again by Steven Spielberg's Shoah project. So these were primary sources. And I think innovative teachers have wonderful opportunities to have students not only read this book, but say, now what more can we be doing? You know, what I'm always happy to take questions from students when I speak, because Lord knows they have lots of questions. There are things they want to know. In fact, at the recent school library conference, uh, librarians told me students are very interested in the Holocaust. And so I think the timing of this book and the others that we have are critically important. I mean, there's so many stories yet to be told. And I've noticed, I hope your audience has, the number of film productions and television productions about the Holocaust uh, has exploded recently as well.
Yes, yes. And I'll also mention that the proceeds from the book, you're donating those to schools and to supporting literacy in school spaces. So I just wanted to make sure that listeners knew that as well.
I appreciate that. I approached the Goldberg family and I said, I'm going to put all my royalties into an account, and I want you all to tell me where would you like those funds to go? And they really didn't have an answer. And so I finally approached them and I said, what if we bought books for every middle school and high school library in the state of South Carolina? They went, oh, that's a great idea. And they joined me at the recent school librarians conference. The Goldbergs sat at a table and they met librarians and they signed copies of the book. And I sat back and I watched all of this. And as an author, it was extremely satisfying to see them interact with librarians who are so important in our world today. Uh, Fighting all the bad information that's out there, but teaching students really important skills. And I sat there and I was really, really pleased to have books to give to librarians. It's a labor of love for me if you don't already know it.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, anything that we've missed that you want to make sure to include before we get to the last question? I always like to make sure we make sure to make space for anything.
I'm just so appreciative of the time that you've taken to talk to me about this book. We believe so strongly in literacy, in reading,
Mhm.
in whatever form that might take, to put books in the hands of young people. I will just say that I have 5 grandchildren now, and one of them just said, "All I want for Christmas is books." And uh,
Lovely.
yeah, absolutely. And for the grandchildren that are here in Columbia, South Carolina, I'm frequently taking them Saturday mornings away from the television to story time at the library and make sure they have a library card, because I strongly believe that if you can start them early and get them hooked on reading, that is the key to success in life and in school.
100%. Absolutely. Uh, well, Frank, where can we learn more about your work and where can we purchase a copy of this book as well?
Thank you. My media literacy website is my name, frankwbaker.com. I mentioned the educational website for teachers is storiesofsurvival.org. And both the graphic novel and the new book, Risk, Resilience, and Renewal, reside at wesurvivedtheholocaust.com. And you can find instantly various ways to purchase the book, whether you are school related or not.
Fantastic. Well, many thanks for the time. It's an open invitation. Always glad to talk about your work and advocacy, and certainly glad to share about this book as well.
Jason, I appreciate the time that you've taken to talk to me about this. As you can tell, I'm rather passionate about two things: media literacy and Holocaust education. And so I hope maybe we can speak again soon.
I would love that. Absolutely. Many, many thanks.